1939, the first siren cut through the morning like a blade. I remember standing by the window, clutching my mother's hand, watching as the sky filled with black shapes that didn't belong to heaven. No one said the word war yet, but we all felt it. The ground trembled, the air turned to dust, and childhood ended before breakfast. They told us to pack quickly. One blanket, one piece of bread, one photograph. We didn't know where we were going. We only knew we had to move. The trains were already crowded with families, soldiers, and people carrying their lives in wooden boxes. Some waved from the platforms. Some didn't make it that far. I was 7 the day we left Warsaw. My mother kissed my forehead and whispered, "Be brave no matter what." Those were the last words I ever heard from her. The countryside rolled by like a painting coming apart. Houses burning in the distance. Horses running without riders. Fields littered with toys and shoes. Every station smelled of smoke and fear. At night, the children cried until there were no tears left. By morning, silence became our only defense. If you stayed quiet, maybe the soldiers wouldn't notice you. We became shadows, little ghosts moving from village to village. Too young to fight, too old to be carried. The adults called us the lost ones. They promised the war would be over soon, that our parents would find us again. But the war only grew, and the world stopped keeping track of names. In the first winter, hunger replaced fear. We learned to steal food from abandoned carts, to sleep in barns, to follow strangers who said they could help. Some of those strangers lied. Others risked everything to save us. I still remember a woman named Marta who hid 6 of us in her cellar for 2 months. She gave us bread when she had none left for herself. When the soldiers came searching, she said we were her own children, and she was shot for it. That's how I learned the cost of kindness. Across Europe there were thousands like us. Children without papers, without language, drifting from one ruined town to another. Some were evacuated by train to the countryside. Some ended up in orphanages run by strangers. Others, like me, simply disappeared into the chaos. We didn't understand borders or politics. We only knew the sound of planes and the feeling of running barefoot through mud. We learned to recognize uniforms by their boots. We learned that sometimes surviving meant pretending not to exist. Every night I dreamed of my mother's face, but even her voice began to fade, replaced by the voices of the other children. The boy who had lost his sister, the girl who still carried a broken doll, the twins who never spoke again. We made our own family, bound not by blood but by loss. Somewhere in that darkness a strange thing happened. We began to protect each other. We shared crumbs, shared blankets, shared hope. Because if one of us gave up, it made the silence louder. The newspapers called us refugees, but we weren't running anymore. We were surviving. And survival, we learned, was its own kind of rebellion. By 1941, the war had swallowed everything. Cities became graves, schools became camps, and the world forgot about children. Governments counted tanks, not names. But we were still there, hidden between ruins, watching history from the cracks of broken walls. No one noticed us then, but we noticed everything. By 1942, the world had become a map of ruins. Everywhere we went, the sky looked the same, gray, endless, heavy with ash. The grown-ups had stopped talking about peace. They talked about surviving the next night. For us, the children left behind, every sunrise was a small victory. The war had divided everything, families, cities, even time itself. There was before and there was after. We no longer remembered the smell of fresh bread or the sound of school bells. Our games were played with stones instead of toys. And our lullabies were the hum of planes flying overhead. We learned to tell the difference between enemy and ally by the shape of their helmets. We learned that sometimes safety was just another word for luck. I remember a boy named Luca. He was 10, with eyes too old for his face. He carried a tin whistle he never played, afraid it would draw attention. We found him alone, in the shell of a house that had once been a bakery. He said he didn't want to be found because everyone who found him eventually disappeared. He was right, but somehow he stayed with us for the rest of the war. He never spoke much, but at night, when the bombing stopped, he would carve little figures out of charcoal and broken glass, tiny people who looked braver than we felt. When he smiled, it felt like daylight. In every occupied city, there were children like Luca, orphans living between the cracks of war. Some stole from soldiers. Some worked for bread. Some simply wandered, invisible to both sides. The streets were full of them, thin faces behind broken windows, watching the world destroy itself. We heard rumors of trains taking children away to safety. Some of those trains never came back. Others led to camps where safety had a different meaning. We didn't understand why some people had to wear yellow stars, or why soldiers shouted at children who looked like us. All we knew was that kindness had become dangerous. By 1943, the world had forgotten what normal looked like. Hospitals were bombed, schools turned into shelters, churches into morgues. Everywhere smelled of smoke, metal, and fear. We got used to it. That was the worst part, getting used to it. There were moments of light, though. A soldier sharing his ration of chocolate with a child. A nurse who risked her life to hide us in the hospital basement. A farmer who left food by the river every morning, never waiting to see who took it. We learned that compassion could survive anything, even war. In 1944, I ended up in an orphanage outside Prague. There were 60 of us, packed into an old monastery. We slept on straw, ate once a day, and shared our stories like they were currency. Some kids still remembered their families. Others only remembered the sound of goodbye. But in that broken place, we learned to hope again. We learned that family wasn't about blood. It was about staying alive together. Sometimes, when the nights were calm, we could hear the front lines moving. The explosions were far away now, like thunder rolling behind the mountains. The war was dying, and it was taking our childhood with it. The last time I saw Luca, he was standing by the window, watching the snow fall through the holes in the roof. He turned to me and said, "When it's over, do you think we'll still know how to play?" I didn't know what to answer, because by then, none of us were children anymore. When the war finally ended in 1945, the world celebrated. Flags waved, bells rang, soldiers hugged strangers in the streets. But in the orphanage, we just stood there watching. The noise of victory didn't reach us. We were too busy counting the faces that were missing. The newspapers called it peace. For us, it was just another kind of silence. The war ended, but the silence stayed. It was a different kind of quiet now, not filled with bombs, but with questions. We had survived, yes, but no one had taught us how to live again. In the summer of 1945, the soldiers stopped marching and the planes stopped screaming. Yet the streets still looked like battlefields. Everywhere you turned, there were buildings without roofs and children without homes. The adults called it peace, but to us, it felt like being left behind after the music stopped. In the orphanage, they told us the war was over. They handed us donated clothes from America and said we would be taken care of now. But no one really knew what to do with thousands of children who had no papers, no parents and no past. We were ghosts walking through victory parades. I remember the first time we were taken to a repatriation camp. Rows of tents lined up like scars on a field. There were doctors, priests, and translators trying to match names to faces. Every few minutes, a child was called forward. Sometimes they smiled. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they refused to leave. No one called my name. The Red Cross workers asked us to write down anything we remembered. Street names, parents' names, anything. But memories are fragile things. After years of running, even our own names felt strange in our mouths. I wrote mother, brown hair, smelled like bread. That was all I had left. By 1946, the camps began to empty. Some children were adopted by families in England, America, or Sweden. They called it a new beginning. For many of us, it was another farewell. We learned that hope and loss often wore the same face. The rest of us were sent to rebuild our cities, not as soldiers, but as survivors. We carried bricks, swept the streets, helped rebuild the schools, where we'd once hidden from bombs. The older ones worked in factories, the younger ones searched for food among ruins. We didn't call it work, we called it living. One morning I saw a group of women clearing rubble from what used to be a library. They were laughing as they worked, covered in dust but shining with something new, purpose. They reminded me that rebuilding wasn't just about walls and windows, it was about people. Some days, when the light hit the broken glass just right, it looked like the world was trying to sparkle again. Maybe that's what healing looked like. Small, stubborn beauty in the middle of ruins. We made friends again, slowly. We told stories about before the war, though most of us could barely remember. Sometimes we lied not to deceive, but to imagine that once we had normal lives. It made the nights easier to bear. I met a girl named Sophia in 1947. She had survived the bombings in Dresden and had a scar across her cheek that she said was from the sky itself. She used to sit by the window and sketch houses with curtains, flowers and laughter. I asked her once why she kept drawing them, and she said, "Because if we can imagine them, maybe we can build them again." It was then I realized that the war had not taken everything. It had left us with imagination, the most dangerous weapon of all. The world was changing fast. Trains ran again, shops reopened. Newspapers printed stories about a future we couldn't yet picture. But in the middle of it all, we were still trying to remember how to be children. Some never did. Some grew up too quickly. And some, like me, kept waiting for someone to come back who never would. The grown-ups said we were lucky to be alive. But sometimes, surviving felt harder than dying. Still, every day the sun rose and we followed it. Not because we believed in miracles, but because we didn't know what else to do. The war had ended, but for the children left behind, the rebuilding had only just begun. By 1948, the sound of hammers had replaced the sound of bombs. Europe was rebuilding, brick by brick, soul by soul. The air smelled different now, of dust, wood, and something that almost felt like hope. We were no longer called orphans. We were called the generation of tomorrow. But tomorrow still felt far away. Governments talked about recovery. Factories reopened. Newspapers printed headlines about the economic miracle. But none of that explained what it felt like to wake up in a world where your childhood had been erased. We had learned to survive war. Now we had to learn how to survive peace. For the first time, people started to notice us again. Reporters came to take photographs of the war children, working in rebuilding projects. They said we were symbols of resilience, living proof that the human spirit couldn't be destroyed. They didn't know that behind our smiles, we still heard sirens in our sleep. I worked laying bricks outside Berlin. We were paid in bread, sometimes in coins, but mostly in belonging. Every brick I placed felt like an apology to the world, for everything we had lost, for everything we had become. Around me were boys and girls my age, all from different countries, all with the same hollow look in their eyes. None of us had parents, but somehow we became each other's family. There was pride in the work. When we rebuilt a school, we weren't just raising walls, we were resurrecting childhood. When we cleared the streets of rubble, we were clearing our own memories. Every act of labor felt sacred, as if we were rebuilding not just cities, but ourselves. In the evenings, the older ones told stories about the past, not the war, but the small things before it. The smell of coffee, a piano playing in the next room, a mother singing while folding laundry. We listened like people hearing a fairy tale for the first time. Those memories became blueprints for the future we wanted to build. By 1949, adoption agencies had expanded worldwide. Some of my friends were sent to new families in America, France, or Canada. Letters arrived sometimes, describing homes with gardens and bicycles, families who smiled at breakfast. I was happy for them, even if I couldn't quite imagine it for myself. Every departure felt like victory and loss at the same time. One day, a photographer visited our 1947. He asked us to stand still for a picture and had a scar across her cheek that she said was from not out of sadness itself, but because we used to sit by the window and sketch victims. We were builders now. We wanted the world to remember us. I asked her once why she kept drawing them, and she said, "But as the architects of peace, as the years passed, build them again. Our scars." It was then I realized that the war had not taken everything. The laughter left us with imagination. We learned trades, opened workshops, fell in love, and had children changing fast. And though we rarely spoke about the past, reopened. It lived inside us, stories about a silent reminder of everything we had survived. But in the middle of it all, when I see we were still trying to remember how to be children. I wonder if they know what it cost for the world to be safe again. And
if they can feel
like
the weight
me,
of all the
kept
hands
waiting
that
for someone
built,
to come back,
cleaned
who
and
never
carried
would.
before
The
them.
grown-ups
Hands
said we
like
were
ours,
lucky to be
once
alive,
trembling,
now
but steady.
sometimes,
Once
surviving
forgotten, now
felt
part of
harder than
everything.
dying.
In
Still,
1951,
every
I
day
returned
the
to
sun
Warsaw.
rose and we
The
followed
city
it.
I remembered
Not because
was
we
gone,
believed in miracles,
but in its place stood
because
something
we didn't know
astonishing.
what else
Life.
to do.
Children
The
were
war
laughing
had
again.
ended, but
Mothers
for the children
hung
left
clothes from
behind,
balconies.
the rebuilding
There were
had
flowers
only
growing
just begun.
where tanks once rolled.
For the first time in years, I believed the world could be kind again. I walked through the square where I had last seen my mother. The stones were new, the fountain repaired, but the air still carried her memory. I whispered, "We made it, Mama," not as a child speaking to a ghost, but as an adult who had kept his promise. The war had taken our families, but it had also made us one. A family built not by blood, but by survival, by shared pain, and by the stubborn refusal to give up. We were the children left behind, and we became the hands that rebuilt the world.